What happens when the simple tasks you've done your whole life suddenly feel impossible? When the strength you took for granted begins to fade, and the modern world offers you nothing but confusing advice and sugary health shakes? Today, we're not talking about another fad diet. We're telling a story. It's the story of Michiel, a man who felt himself fading away until he uncovered a powerful secret, not in a modern lab, but in the pages of his grandfather's forgotten journal. This is a journey about reclaiming strength, one real meal at a time. If you've ever felt that frustration or are looking for a path back to vitality, this story is for you. Please give this video a like to show your support and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single step of this incredible transformation. Let's begin. The air in the garden, Michiel Vance's sanctuary, was cool and heavy, with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses, the very ones his wife, Eleanor, had planted a decade ago. A fine Pacific Northwest mist settled on his grey hair and worn flannel shirt, a familiar embrace that usually brought him comfort, but today it felt like a heavy shroud. His target was a pot of wilting hydrangeas on the far side of the patio. His enemy, perched beside the spigot, was the large, green watering can. It was a simple object, a tool he had wielded for 40 years, with the casual ease of a man who understood the rhythms of the earth. Now, it mocked him. He gripped the handle, his knuckles white and stiff. With a grunt that embarrassed him in the quiet of the morning, he heaved. Water sloshed over the rim, soaking his worn leather boots. The weight wasn't just in the water. It was a dense, pulling gravity that shot a protest up his arm, through his shoulder, and into the weary muscles of his back. He took 5 shuffling steps before a tremor in his hand forced him to set the can down with a heavy thud. Gasping, he leaned against the weathered fence, his gaze falling upon the garden. It was chaos. Weeds, bold and defiant, choked the life from the delicate lavender. The once pristine lines of the vegetable patch had blurred into a tangled mess. Eleanor's rose bushes, his most cherished responsibility, were crying out for a pruning he no longer had the strength to give. Each overgrown vine, each wilting flower, was a testament to his own decline. He wasn't just losing his garden, he was losing himself. Grandpa, the voice, bright and full of life, shattered his bleak reverie. Leo, a 7-year-old whirlwind of boundless energy, burst through the back door and sprinted across the lawn, his small sneakers leaving damp prints in the grass. "Grandpa, up to the sky," he yelled, his arms shooting upwards in a familiar, expectant gesture. A pang of love and dread resonated in Michel's chest. The up-to-the-sky game was their ritual. It used to be the highlight of their days together. He would crouch down, let Leo scramble into his arms, and then lift him high above his head, spinning him gently as the boy shrieked with pure, unadulterated joy. "Okay, little man," Michiel said, forcing a smile as he pushed himself off the fence. "Let's see if we can reach the clouds today." He bent his knees, bracing himself. Leo wrapped his small arms around his neck, a warm, trusting weight. Michiel locked his hands behind the boy's legs and prepared to lift, calling on a strength that was no longer there. He straightened his legs, his muscles screaming in rebellion. Leo rose a few feet off the ground, but Michiel's arms trembled violently. A sharp, searing pain flared in his lower back. His breath hitched. He couldn't do it. With a soft, defeated sigh, he lowered his grandson back to the ground. "My old bones are a bit creaky today, Leo," he managed to say, his voice strained. How about we look for earthworms instead?" Leo looked up at him, his initial excitement dimming into confusion, then a flicker of disappointment. It was a fleeting expression, gone in an instant as he was distracted by a passing ladybug, but Michiel saw it. That look was a dagger to his heart, a more profound pain than any ache in his joints. It was the moment he became, in his grandson's eyes, simply old. Just then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway signaled the end of their time together. Sarah, his daughter, walked through the side gate, her phone pressed to her ear as she finished a work call. She was a force of nature, always moving, always solving problems. "Okay, talk soon. Bye," she said, slipping the phone into her purse. Her sharp, professional gaze swept over the garden, and her brow furrowed with concern. She then looked at her father, at the sweat on his brow and the weary slump of his shoulders. "Dad, this place," she began, her tone a mixture of love and exasperation. "You look exhausted. You can't keep doing all this yourself." "I'm managing," Michel said, though the words tasted like a lie. Sarah didn't seem to hear him. She walked over to the large tote bag she had set down and pulled out a case of vanilla-flavored nutritional drinks. The label was bright and cheerful, promising senior wellness and vitality with pictures of smiling, silver-haired couples cycling and playing tennis. "I brought you something," she announced, her voice softening into that of a caregiver. "These have all the vitamins and protein you need. It's much easier than cooking. Just one for breakfast, one for lunch. It will help you get your energy back." Michiel stared at the bottles. It felt like an indictment, a declaration that he was no longer capable of even feeding himself properly. He wanted to tell her about the satisfaction of a home-cooked meal, about the simple joy of an egg fried just right. He wanted to tell her that his exhaustion wasn't something that could be fixed by a sugary synthetic drink. But he saw the genuine worry in her eyes, the desperate need to do something, and his protest died in his throat. "Thank you, Sarah," he said quietly. Later that evening, long after the house had fallen silent, Michel stood alone in his kitchen. He twisted the cap off one of the wellness shakes. The seal broke with a clinical hiss. He raised the bottle and took a sip. The taste was cloyingly sweet, with a chalky, artificial aftertaste that coated his tongue. He leaned against the counter, the cold bottle in his hand, and stared out the window at the darkening silhouette of his overgrown garden. Each sip felt like a surrender, a quiet admission of the defeat he had been fighting for so long. He wasn't just drinking a shake, he was swallowing his own failure. And in the quiet of his kitchen, Michiel Vance had never felt more alone. The week that followed was a landscape of beige monotony, each day punctuated by the clinical hiss of a bottle cap and the chalky, vanilla-flavored gloom of Sarah's wellness shakes. They did not, as the label promised, give him vitality. Instead, they settled in his stomach like a leaden weight, a false, chemical fullness that left him feeling bloated and disconnected from his own body. His energy, rather than returning, came in short, jittery bursts, followed by a profound sluggishness that made even walking to the mailbox feel like a monumental task. He had become a ghost in his own home. Frustration mounted, a silent, simmering anger at his own helplessness and at the well-meaning tyranny of his daughter's concern. He needed to do something, anything, to feel productive. He decided to tackle the one room he had avoided for months, his small, dusty office where Eleanor's collection of antique gardening books still lined the shelves. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon light as he began the task. He ran a cloth over the spines, the familiar titles bringing a bittersweet ache to his chest. He was lost in a memory of Eleanor, her hands covered in soil as she explained the Latin name for a wildflower, when his fingers brushed against a book that felt different. Tucked between a thick volume on perennial care and a guide to rose cultivation was a small, plain journal, its dark leather cover cracked with age. It wasn't one of Eleanor's. Curious, he pulled it from the shelf. It was heavy for its size, held shut by a simple leather strap. As he untied it, the scent of old paper and something faintly earthy, like dried tobacco, filled the air. The first page was inscribed with a bold, looping script he hadn't seen in over 50 years. Michiel Vance Sr., 1952, his grandfather. A man he remembered as having hands like carved oak and a boundless, quiet strength, a farmer who had worked his land with vigor until his final days. Michiel sank into his worn office chair, the journal resting in his lap like a sacred text. He turned the brittle pages, his fingers tracing the faded ink. It was not a diary of daily events, but a meticulous record of life, work, and sustenance. There were notes on crop rotation and weather patterns, but mostly it was about food. Page after page was filled with his grandfather's observations on what he called foods for endurance. There was no mention of vitamins or supplements, only whole, powerful ingredients. Michel's eyes scanned the entries, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. October 5th. Harvest is done. Strength is low. A man's body is an engine. It cannot run on poor fuel. Rely on the tinned beef and tuna. They are dense with power and ask little in return. Paired with the mushrooms from the forest floor, they restore what the hard work takes away. He found another passage, circled for emphasis, a word on fads. The neighbor speaks of newfangled powders and miracle tonics. I trust what has always worked. The beans from our own fields, stored for winter, provide a slow, steady fire. Strength is not built on quick fixes, but on the foundation of real food. It was as if his grandfather were speaking directly to him, across the chasm of time. This was not the language of marketing or the confusing advice of the modern world. It was simple, practical wisdom, born from a life of hard-earned experience. Michiel felt a spark of hope, a connection to a legacy of strength he had thought was lost to him forever. He kept reading, devouring the words. Then, he came across a page near the end, the heading underlined twice. Strength Sappers. A warning. The body is clever, but it can be fooled by the empty calories of modern processed starches, the instant noodles, and the fluffy white breads. They are a flash in the pan, a quick burst of energy that leads to a crash. Worse, they rob the body of its ability to use good protein. To eat a piece of quality beef with a bowl of this refined flour is to waste the gift of the meat. It is like putting water in a fuel tank. They create a slow poison in the tissues that makes a man old before his time. Michiel stopped, the words seeming to lift off the page. A slow poison in the tissues. He thought of the instant noodles he so often reached for out of convenience. He thought of the leaden feeling in his gut after drinking the sugary shakes. His grandfather, with no knowledge of modern biochemistry or terms like glycemic index, had understood a fundamental truth that Michiel, in his modern world, had completely forgotten. He closed the journal gently, a profound sense of clarity washing over him. The path forward was no longer shrouded in the mist of confusion and despair. The answer wasn't in a factory-sealed bottle. It had been here all along, tucked away on a dusty shelf, waiting for him. Holding the journal, Michiel felt a new resolve solidify within him. He was not just the fading echo of the man he used to be. He was the grandson of Michiel Vance Sr. A legacy of strength was in his blood. It was time to start acting like it. For the first time in months, Michiel Vance drove to the grocery store, not with a sense of weary obligation, but with a mission. His grandfather's journal sat on the passenger seat, its worn leather cover a tangible source of newfound purpose. The fluorescent lights of the supermarket seemed less harsh today, the aisles less daunting. He bypassed the section with the brightly colored boxes of processed health foods and navigated his cart with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for. He found the canned goods aisle, a section he usually associated with last-minute meals and bachelorhood. Now, he saw it through his grandfather's eyes, a pantry of preserved strength. He picked up a can of tuna, feeling its solid weight in his hand. Dense with power, the journal had said. He added several more to his cart, alongside canned mushrooms, robust-looking cans of beef, and a variety of beans, kidney, black, and white. It was a simple, unglamorous collection of foods, but to Michiel, it felt like he was gathering the components for a powerful engine. He felt a flicker of the man he used to be, capable, decisive, and in control. Back in his own kitchen, the energy from his successful expedition carried him forward. The silence of the house didn't feel lonely. It felt focused. He would start with the combination his grandfather had mentioned first: tuna and mushrooms. He opened the cans, the simple, familiar sounds echoing in the quiet room. He sautéed the mushrooms with a bit of onion and garlic, the savory aroma a welcome change from the artificial sweetness of the past week. He flaked the tuna into the pan, watching as it all came together. But as the meal neared completion, a familiar pang of weariness began to set in. The initial burst of adrenaline was fading, and his back ached from standing. He craved something more, a comforting base to carry the flavors. His eyes landed on the pantry shelf, on a familiar, brightly colored package that had been a staple for years. Instant noodles, quick, easy, and satisfying in their own simple way. It was an old habit, a thoughtless reach for convenience. Just this once, he told himself, it will make the meal more substantial. He boiled the water, and in minutes, a block of wavy, processed noodles was ready in his bowl. He spooned the hot tuna and mushroom mixture over the top. Sitting at his small kitchen table, he took the first bite. It was warm and savory, yet underneath, there was something not quite right. As he continued to eat, the clean flavors of the fish and mushrooms became muddled, lost in the starchy, slightly gummy texture of the noodles. By the time he finished, the feeling of purpose had been replaced by a familiar, heavy lethargy. An old, dull ache began to throb in his knuckles. Just then, the phone rang, its cheerful tone jarring. It was Sarah, right on schedule for her evening check-in. "Hi, Dad, how are you feeling?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. "Did you have your shake for dinner?" "Actually, no," Michael said, a note of pride in his voice despite the growing discomfort in his stomach. "I did something different. I found one of Grandpa's old journals. It's full of notes about nutrition, about foods for strength. I went to the store and cooked for myself tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," Sarah said, her tone shifting from cheerful to cautious. "That's interesting. What did you make?" "A stir-fry with canned tuna and mushrooms, served over some noodles." "It was quite good," he said, the lie feeling thin even to his own ears. "Wait." Sarah's voice sharpened with alarm. "Canned food and instant noodles. Dad, that's the opposite of healthy. It's full of sodium and preservatives. You're going to make yourself sick. Please, just drink the shakes I bought for you. They're scientifically formulated." Michael's newfound resolve began to crumble under the weight of her disapproval. "It's not like that, Sarah. It's about real food. My grandfather lived to be 98, strong as an ox. That was a different time. People worked differently, lived differently," she retorted, her voice rising with a familiar, frustrated cadence. "We know more now. You can't live on canned fish and packaged noodles. I'm going to book a doctor's appointment for you. We need to get you on a proper plan." The conversation devolved quickly. Every point Michel tried to make was countered by a barrage of modern health buzzwords and anxious warnings. His excitement curdled into a bitter defensiveness. He wasn't a child who needed to be managed. He was a man trying to reclaim his life. "I don't need a doctor, Sarah. I need you to listen to me," he finally snapped, his voice louder than he intended. "I am listening," she shot back, her voice now laced with hurt. "I'm listening to you tell me you're eating junk food and I'm scared, Dad. I'm scared of losing you." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Michiel felt the fight drain out of him, replaced by a profound weariness. He looked at his empty bowl on the table, felt the inflammatory ache spreading through his joints, and heard the genuine fear in his daughter's voice. His first attempt at taking control had ended in failure, a physical failure, and now, an emotional one. "I have to go, Sarah," he said quietly, and hung up the phone before she could reply. He sat in the deepening twilight of his kitchen, the silence now a crushing weight. His grandfather's wisdom had felt so clear, so true. But the reality of his first meal, and the sharp disapproval of the person he loved most, had left him adrift in a sea of doubt. Sleep offered no escape. Michael tossed and turned, his body a geography of dull, persistent aches. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, a chorus of doubt harmonizing with the inflammatory thrum in his joints. Dejected, he rose with the grey dawn and shuffled into the kitchen. The house was cold, the silence thick with yesterday's failure. His eyes fell on the remaining case of wellness shakes, their cheerful labels a stark mockery of how he felt. For a fleeting moment, he considered surrendering. It would be so easy to twist the cap, to drink the pre-approved, scientifically formulated solution and end this struggle. But as he reached for a bottle, his gaze drifted to the small, leather-bound journal lying on the counter where he'd left it. It was a quiet, unassuming object, yet it held more promise than all the brightly packaged promises in the world. He couldn't reconcile the potent wisdom within its pages with the miserable state he was in. There had to be an explanation, something he had missed. He poured a cup of black coffee, the bitter warmth a small comfort, and sat down at the table, opening the journal once more. He flipped past the entries on endurance foods, his fingers searching for the section that had given him a flicker of unease the day before. He found it near the back, the heading clear and ominous. Strength Sappers. This time, he read the words not with passing curiosity, but with the focused intensity of a detective searching for a vital clue. A warning, his grandfather had written. The body is clever, but it can be fooled by the empty calories of modern processed starches. He read the passage again, his eyes locking onto a specific line. To eat a piece of quality beef with a bowl of this refined flour is to waste the gift of the meat. Michel's breath caught in his throat. He had done exactly that. He hadn't paired his protein with beef, but he had combined it with the most refined, processed flour imaginable. Instant noodles. He continued reading, his grandfather's century-old observations painting a startlingly clear picture of what had happened inside his own body just hours before. The rapid blood sugar surge creates a metabolic disaster. The transcript from the sample file had explained. His grandfather's words were simpler, yet they conveyed the same truth. It is a flash in the pan. They rob the body of its ability to use good protein. The journal went on to describe how this combination creates a slow poison in the tissues that makes a man old before his time. Michael, a man of science, felt the tumblers of understanding click into place. A slow poison. Inflammation. He remembered reading a term in a health article years ago, advanced glycation end products. Toxic compounds formed when protein or fat combine with sugar in the bloodstream. They stiffen tissues, cause inflammation, and accelerate aging. His grandfather hadn't known the scientific term, but he had understood the result perfectly. The instant noodles hadn't just been an empty filler. They had actively sabotaged the meal, preventing the good protein from doing its job and flooding his system with the very poison that was weakening him. The revelation was a lightning strike, burning away the fog of his doubt. He hadn't failed the journal's wisdom, he had failed to fully understand it. A new resolve, harder and clearer than before, settled over him. This was a battle, and he would no longer allow the enemy to sit in his own pantry. With a surge of purpose, he stood up, walked to the cupboard, and began pulling out every package of instant noodles he owned. He didn't stop there. He went to the refrigerator and gathered the remaining wellness shakes, their vanilla scent now seeming sickly and deceptive. He carried the armful of processed promises to the large bin outside his back door, the contents representing years of convenient habits and well-intentioned but misguided advice. With a deep, cleansing breath, he tipped the entire load into the bin. The plastic bottles and crinkly packages landed with a hollow, final thud. It was more than just throwing away food. It was a declaration of independence. Back in the kitchen, he felt a profound sense of liberation. He was now ready to try again, the right way. He pulled out one of the cans of beef and a can of dark red kidney beans. Following another simple entry in the journal, he slow-cooked them with chopped onions and carrots from his garden, the rich, savory aroma gradually filling the house. It was the smell of real food, of sustenance drawn from the earth. An hour later, he sat down to a bowl of the hearty stew. He ate slowly, deliberately. There was no chemical aftertaste, no heavy, bloated feeling. Instead, a clean, sustained warmth spread through him. It wasn't the jittery, fleeting energy of sugar, but something deeper, more fundamental. It felt like his body was finally getting the right kind of fuel. That night, for the first time in years, Michiel Vance slept soundly, a deep, restorative sleep free from the aches and anxieties that had plagued him for so long. The poison was out of his pantry, and for the first time, he truly believed he had the power to get it out of his system, too. The weeks that followed unfolded with a new, quiet rhythm. Michiel's life was no longer governed by fatigue and frustration, but by the simple, profound wisdom of his grandfather's journal. His days began not with a chalky shake, but with the satisfying sizzle of scrambled eggs mixed with sautéed mushrooms and a side of black beans. Lunch was no longer an afterthought, but a deliberate act of nourishment. A rich tuna salad, held together not with mayonnaise but with olive oil and lemon juice, mixed with hearty white beans and fresh herbs from a pot on his windowsill. He paired this new way of eating with a simple routine of movement, also gleaned from the journal's pages. His grandfather had called them daily tensions, simple bodyweight exercises performed with mindful focus. He did slow, deliberate squats while waiting for the coffee to brew. He performed push-ups against the kitchen wall, feeling the dormant muscles in his chest and shoulders awaken. He took his old heavy gardening tools, the steel spade, the iron rake, and lifted them in slow, controlled arcs, not to work the soil, but to work his own body. The changes were subtle at first, like the slow unfurling of a new leaf. Then, one afternoon, he reached for a stubborn jar of pickles that had bested him a month before. Without thinking, he gave it a twist. The lid popped open with a satisfying whoosh. He stood for a moment, staring at the jar in his hand, a slow smile spreading across his face. The quiet victories began to accumulate. A full laundry basket carried up the stairs became a single trip, not two. His breathing remained even, his legs steady. A walk to the town market and back, once a journey that required a long rest afterward, now left him feeling invigorated. The crisp air, a welcome friend, rather than a chilly adversary. The true test, however, was the garden. One bright, clear morning, he stepped outside with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He knelt in the soil, his knees complaining but not shouting, and began to weed Eleanor's rose bed. He worked for an hour, then two, his hands moving with a growing confidence, pulling the stubborn intruders from the earth. When he finally stood up, his back ached. But it was a good ache, the honest fatigue of productive work, not the brittle pain of weakness. He looked at the cleared flower bed, at the rich, dark soil now free to breathe. He felt the warmth of the sun on his skin and the gritty texture of the earth under his fingernails. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the garden was not a symbol of his decline, but a canvas for his recovery. He was a gardener again. He was himself again. 2 months passed in a blur of quiet progress. Michel's world had expanded from the four walls of his house to the edges of his thriving garden and the familiar paths of his town. One Tuesday afternoon, Sarah's car pulled into the driveway, an unexpected visit that sent a ripple of apprehension through him. She stepped out of the car and stopped, her expression unreadable. She was looking at him, really looking at him. He had lost the soft puffiness around his middle, and the simple act of carrying a bag of potting soil had brought a new definition to his arms and shoulders. To Michel, it was the architecture of returning strength. To his daughter, it was something else entirely. "Dad," she said, her voice tight with a carefully controlled panic. "You've lost so much weight. You look frail." Before he could respond, she marched into the house and placed a stack of papers on the kitchen table. They were printouts from websites, the headlines screaming in bold letters, "The dangers of high-protein diets. Is canned food giving you hypertension? Warning signs of malnutrition in the elderly." "I've been doing some research," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "This diet you're on, it's not safe. You're wasting away, Dad. This is not healthy." Michael looked from the alarmist headlines to the genuine fear in his daughter's eyes. He tried to explain. He told her about the pickle jar, about the weeding, about how his energy was steady and his sleep was deep. He picked up his grandfather's journal, its leather cover now soft from daily use. "It's all in here, Sarah. It's not a fad. It's just real food." She waved a dismissive hand, unwilling to even look at it. "That's old-fashioned nonsense. We have science now. We know what's good for you." The argument escalated, their voices rising to fill the small kitchen. It was a clash of two worlds, her world of online experts and clinical studies, and his world of ancestral wisdom and tangible results. For every point he made about how he felt, she countered with a statistic about sodium or a warning about cholesterol. Finally, her composure broke. "I've already made an appointment," she said, her voice cracking, "with Dr. Evans, for next Tuesday, and you are going." It wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum. "If you don't go," she continued, her eyes welling with tears, I don't know what I'll do. I can't just stand by and watch you fade away. I'm scared of losing you." The anger drained out of Michael, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. He saw past her stubbornness, past her misguided conviction, and saw the terrified daughter who loved him. He was no longer fighting for his diet. He was fighting for her peace of mind. "All right, Sarah," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I'll go." The air in Dr. Evans's waiting room was sterile and thick with tension. Sarah sat beside Michael, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She had brought her file of printouts, ready to present her case. Michael, meanwhile, sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees, feeling a strange sense of calm. He had done the work. He could only trust in the results. In the examination room, Dr. Evans listened with a patient, professional air as Sarah laid out her concerns, describing the extreme canned food diet and her father's alarming weight loss. The doctor nodded, his expression neutral, but Michael could see the flicker of conventional skepticism in his eyes. The examination began. Blood pressure, excellent. Heart and lungs, clear and strong. Then Dr. Evans brought out a small device, a handheld dynamometer. "All right, Michael," he said. "I want you to squeeze this as hard as you can. We're going to test your grip strength." This was it. Grip strength, the doctor had once told him, was one of the most accurate markers of overall physical health and vitality in older adults. Michel took the device. He wrapped his fingers around it, took a deep breath, and squeezed. He channeled the memory of lifting the watering can, of weeding the garden, of the quiet, daily work. He squeezed until his arm trembled with the effort. Dr. Evans took the dynamometer and looked at the reading. He paused. He looked at it again, then flipped back through Michael's chart to a reading from his checkup 6 months prior. A small frown of surprise creased the doctor's brow. "That's remarkable," he murmured. While they waited, a nurse came in with the results from his blood work, printed fresh from the lab. Dr. Evans scanned the page, his eyebrows rising slightly. He leaned back in his chair and took off his glasses, looking from the chart to Michael, his skepticism replaced by genuine, professional curiosity. "Sarah, your concerns were valid," he began, turning to her, "but the evidence here tells a very different story. Michael's blood pressure is lower than it's been in 5 years. His blood sugar is perfect. His cholesterol has improved significantly, and his inflammation markers are way down, and his grip strength, it's increased by nearly 30%. He turned to Michael, a look of respect in his eyes. "Michael," he said, a smile finally breaking through, "whatever you're doing, it's working. Tell me more about your grandfather's journal." Sarah just stared, the stack of papers in her lap suddenly looking flimsy and irrelevant. She was speechless. The drive home from the doctor's office was steeped in a thick, profound silence. Mitchell kept his eyes on the road, allowing the quiet to do its work. He could feel Sarah's gaze on him, a mixture of shock, relief, and introspection. Finally, as they pulled into his driveway, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong." It was 2 simple words, but they held the weight of months of worry and conflict. It was an apology, an admission, and an opening. "I was so scared," she continued, tears glistening in her eyes. "All those articles. I thought I was protecting you. I just couldn't see." "I know," Michael said gently. That evening, for the first time in years, the silence between them was replaced by the comfortable sounds of a shared kitchen. At Sarah's quiet request, they cooked dinner together. Mitchell pulled out the cans of beef and beans, the mushrooms and onions. As they chopped vegetables side by side, he didn't just show her what to do, he explained the why. "The selenium in the tuna helps protect the muscle tissue from damage," he explained, his voice filled with a quiet passion. "The zinc in the beef is what your body needs for protein synthesis. That's the actual building process. And the beans have an amino acid called lysine, which is essential for growth and is often missing in other foods." Sarah listened, truly listened, not as a caregiver checking on a patient, but as a student learning from a teacher. As they ate the simple, savory stew, she opened up about the relentless pressure she felt to keep her family healthy, about the confusing flood of information online, and how she had fallen for the slick marketing of convenient, processed solutions. In the warm glow of the kitchen, over a meal born from century-old wisdom, the emotional distance that had grown between them finally dissolved. They weren't just a father and daughter, they were allies, sharing a meal and a newfound understanding. Spring arrived in the Pacific Northwest with a burst of vibrant, defiant life. The cherry trees lining Michael's street exploded in a riot of pink, and his garden, once a source of shame, was now a testament to his own renewal. He could haul 50-pound bags of mulch from his car to the backyard, his legs strong and steady. He could turn the soil in the vegetable patch with a vigor he thought was a distant memory. The garden, like the gardener, was thriving. One bright Saturday, Sarah and Leo came to visit. Leo, spotting his grandfather, immediately sprinted across the newly green lawn, his face alight with a familiar request. "Grandpa, up to the sky," he yelled, throwing his arms toward the clouds. A wave of pure joy washed over Michiel. This was the moment. This was the true measure of his victory. This time was different. He didn't hesitate. He didn't brace himself for pain. He planted his feet firmly on the soft grass, bent his knees into a powerful squat, and welcomed his grandson's trusting weight. With a smooth, single motion, he pushed through his legs and lifted. Leo soared upwards, higher than ever before, his shrieks of laughter echoing through the garden. Michiel held him aloft, spinning him gently. The boy in his arms didn't feel heavy. He felt solid, real. A precious weight that symbolized everything he had regained. From the back porch, Sarah watched, her hand covering her mouth. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. As Michiel finally lowered a giggling Leo back to the ground, he held his grandson close, burying his face in the boy's soft hair. He had done it. This was never just about building muscle. It was about rebuilding a life. It was about having the strength to lift the future into the air and hear it laugh. He had not turned back the clock, but he had wound it up again, and it was ticking loud and clear. 6 months later, the man who had struggled to lift a watering can was a distant memory. Michiel had become a quiet pillar of his community garden club, where he shared not just his prize-winning tomatoes, but also his hard-won nutritional wisdom with his peers. He had created a small, self-printed guide, simply titled The Gardener's Strength, which translated his grandfather's principles into simple, actionable steps for his friends, many of whom were fighting their own quiet battles with aging. The changes had rippled through his own family. Sarah, having cleared her pantry of its processed temptations, now cooked with a new sense of purpose, her entire family benefiting from the shift to real, whole foods. The final scene of his transformation unfolded on a warm autumn afternoon. He and Leo were in the garden together, planting a new apple sapling, a promise of future harvests. Michiel dug the hole with strong, easy strokes of the shovel, while Leo carefully placed the young tree into the earth, patting the soil around its base with his small hands. Michiel stood back, leaning on the shovel, and looked at his world. He saw the thriving garden, a living tapestry of color and life. He saw his healthy, happy grandson, a symbol of the future, and he felt the firm, reliable strength in his own body, a quiet hum of vitality that had become his new normal. He finally understood. His grandfather's legacy wasn't a plot of land or even the precious journal. It was the timeless, simple truth that if you nourish the body, the spirit will flourish. He was no longer a man defined by what he had lost. He was a gardener, and in the rich soil of his own life, he was growing again. Thank you for joining us on Michiel's journey from weakness to wellness. We hope his story has offered you a measure of hope and inspiration. The desire to be strong for ourselves and for the ones we love is a powerful motivator. And sometimes, the best wisdom is found by looking back at the simple truths of the past. Until we meet again, stay well and never forget the strength that lies within you.